Well, I'm turning 55 in a few days, and there's no guarantee that I'm going to be around much longer, and so I thought I'd make this little video so that my children could know for sure what is really going on in my head. As you see, I'm kind of quiet on the outside, but there really are a lot of profound thoughts rolling around on the inside. Like, for instance, one thing I ponder a lot is how easy it is just to sit there and wish you had money. I mean, I guess that's what I like about it so much. It's just so easy to just sit there rocking back and forth and wishing you had money. In fact, I've always wondered why the dove got to be the peace symbol. I mean, why the dove? What about a pillow? A pillow has a lot more feathers than a dove, and the pillow doesn't have that dangerous beak. Why isn't a pillow the peace symbol? Speaking of pillows, I think instead of putting quarters under your kids' pillows when they lose their teeth, we should put pine cones. Yeah, you heard me, pine cones. That way they would learn that wishing isn't going to save our national forest. We're going to have to get up off of our duffs and go do that ourselves. In fact, I've had a lot of those kinds of thoughts since I moved up here to the Northwest. Someone told me just the other day that it was frightening that we were losing so much topsoil each year. Frightening? I don't think so. In fact, I told the story around a campfire the other night and no one there got scared. I don't think that's all that frightening. You know, the mistake that most of us make is thinking that the state-appointed attorney is our friend. It's easy to sit and scoff at an old man's folly. I've done that myself. But you should also check out his Adam's apple. Old men have huge Adam's apples. Someone once told me that human marriages ought to take a lesson from the swan. They told me that the swan mates for life. But if you really think about it, that's no big deal. First of all, if you're a swan, you probably aren't going to go find another swan that looks much better than the one you have. Those swans, they all look alike. And I was thinking the other day about seeing eye dogs. I think most seeing eye dogs, I think instead of the seeing eye dogs, that we should just give all the blind people guns. And then it would be a lot cheaper that way than dogs. And then if you were walking around just shooting a gun, everybody's going to get out of your way, even the cars. You wouldn't even have to worry about the cars that way. They're going to keep their distance too. Speaking of dogs, if dogs ever take over our world and they choose a king from among them, I hope they don't just go by size, because I think there's some chihuahuas that have some pretty awesome ideas. You know, sometimes I just feel the need to get away, but I don't have the money to leave, so I just get away in my mind. I go to my imaginary spot where the beach is perfect and the weather is awesome and the water's warm. The only bad thing about it are the flies. They're all over the place, flying around my head, up my nostrils, down my throat. They're terrible. And I was thinking the other day that when I get old and can't move around much, I hope that some animal doesn't come along and bore a hole in my head and lay its eggs in my brain. Because later I might think I'm having this great, wonderful idea, but it would just be those eggs hatching. You know, my dad used to tell me that most men would give less than 100%, and that if I were to give 110%, then I would always have a job. Well, I think a little bit differently than that, have a different philosophy than he did. To me, it's always a good idea to carry around 2 sacks, one under each arm, when you're walking around, and that way if anybody walks up to you and says, "Hey, can you give me a hand?" you can say, "Sorry, I have these sacks." You know, fear can sometimes be a useful emotion. For instance, let's just say that you're an astronaut on the moon and you fear that your partner has turned into Dracula. Well, the next time he goes out on the moon to get some moon pieces, wham! Slam the door shut behind him and blast off, leaving him all alone there on the moon. He might get on his radio and give you a call and say something like, "Hey, I'm not Dracula." To which I would just reply, "Yeah, think again, Batman." You know, I love nicknames, giving all of my kids a nickname, but you really have to be careful when you pick out a nickname for yourself. For instance, let's say you choose the nickname Flyhead. Normally you would think that Flyhead would mean a person who had a beautiful swept back features, as if they were flying through the air. But you ought to stop and consider that it could also mean having a head that looks like a fly. I know it doesn't seem possible, but people could actually think that. Speaking of flying, one day not long ago, I thought the neighborhood blue jay was trying to communicate with me. I know you think that's probably a little bit weird, but I really believe it was true. I would sit in there in my room and I would see him fly through the window of my neighbor's house, and he'd pick up the phone and dial someone, and then immediately my phone would ring, and so I would answer it and go, "What? What are you saying?" But all I could make out on the other end was this squawking and this chirping. I guess blue jays just don't speak of the English. Oh, I'm sorry, I've digressed a little bit away from my profound thoughts. That's what I'm doing, not stories about blue jays, but profound thoughts. So here's one. Instead of just burning a guy at the stake, what about burning him at the stilts? Wouldn't that be better? It would last a lot longer and you'd get him to move around a lot. Here's another one. The wise man can pick up a grain of sand and envision a whole universe, but the fool will just lay down in some seaweed and roll around until he's just completely draped in the stuff. And then he'll stand up and say something like, "Hey, look at me, I'm Vine Man." I was at the beach the other day and this wounded seal was swimming for all he was worth to get to shore. You know, one thought that crossed my mind, probably the funniest thing to a shark is a wounded seal trying to swim to shore. He's probably just licking his chops and going, "Where does he think he's going anyway?" Well, you know, at one point or another we're all weak to some degree. But if you think that weakness can be turned into a strength, hate to tell you this, but that's just another weakness. And I love Westerns. I would have loved to live back in the days of the Old West and everyone carried a gun on their hip. If I lived back in the Old West and instead of carrying a 6-gun in my holster, I'd carry a soldering iron. That way when some smart aleck cowboy said something like, "Hey dude, you're carrying a soldering around in your gun holster," and then everybody would start laughing at me, to which I would say, "That's right, cowboy, but it's not just a soldering iron, it's the soldering iron of justice." And then everyone would get real quiet and they would all be ashamed because they had made fun of the soldering iron of justice. And speaking of justice, did you catch the presidential elections this year? Everyone picking on one another. I just wish one year that a robot would run for president. That way when he came to town we could all take a shot at him and not feel bad about it. After all, it's just a robot. And then finally, a little word of wisdom that you can use when I'm dead and gone. It served me well all of these years. When you're at a Thanksgiving dinner like the one we're at this year, and you don't like the stuffing or the cranberry sauce like I don't, then just pretend like you're eating it, but instead put it in your lap and form it into this big mushy ball. And then later when you're out back having a cigar with the boys, just let out this big fake cough and throw the ball on the ground and say, "Boy, those sure are good cigars, aren't they?" It works every time. I wouldn't lie to you. And one more thing. When Dad says he's going to the store to buy some butter, and all that's happening at home is football and turkey cooking, and all the adult male children get in the car with him and they all go to the store to buy some butter, you might want to be a little bit leery of that. especially when Grumpy's pool hall is just right across the street from the store.